Hello and welcome to Logan Sounds Off. Today I'm interviewing John Kelly. How are you, John?
Very good, Logan. How are you?
I'm brilliant, thanks for asking. For those who have been living under a rock for the past couple of years, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm from Enniskillen in County Fermanagh. Beautiful county, full of water. Not much else, but that's all the better for that. I currently work in radio and television, mostly on RTÉ and also on an American station called Sirius XM, and work in radio and television. I also write a bit, although that has never been for me my living as such, but it's something I'm very sort of devoted to and committed to doing. So um, that's pretty much that's pretty much me at this stage of my life. I'm 57 years old, and I find that hard to believe. What age are you, Logan?
I'm 11.
Yeah,
I'm
I think
turning
I'm
12
11.
soon now.
Yeah, I think I'm about 11. That's I think 11's a good age.
We all have a mental age.
What's your mental age?
11.
Okay, that's
Probably
your
11. I,
yeah.
I
Yeah,
I feel very 11 at the
you're a
moment, you know.
smarter man than me, so you're quite right. Stay at 11.
Um, I've got a question for you now. Actually, as a child, when you were maybe 11,
Yeah.
as a child, who influenced you while you were growing up?
Well, I was an only child, so my parents had a massive influence on me, a positive influence. They weren't overly strict or anything, and even though I was an only child, I was lucky because I had lots of friends nearby. I think it can be hard if you're an only child if you don't know any other children, apart from maybe at school. But I had loads of friends. I was in and out of their houses. They were in and out of my house. So it didn't, I never felt sort of lonely as an only child. Um,
Yeah.
so that would have been a big influence that I was an only child actually, because I was able to indulge in my hobbies. You know, if I took an interest in something, I was able to devote my time to it. And I didn't have a big brother or a big sister wrecking what I was doing, or interrupting, or, you know, if I wanted to watch a television program, I could watch it from start to finish uninterrupted, which is a bit of a luxury when you're a kid, especially if you've got 12 brothers and sisters. So my parents would have been a big influence on me. And I guess that was the 11 was sort of the stage of my life where I hadn't really gotten into music yet, or found what my real kind of passions in life were. So I just kind of went along with the flow, what you did through school and what you did through your own local community and so on, which was all great.
Wow. So that see, I said 11 and it intertwined perfectly with the topic. Now that's something that I'm gonna remember from this interview. And you see there that you were 11 when you started to go with the flow and things, and I'm going to come back to that. But what age were you when you got into music that you really started to get a massive interest towards music in
Right.
and around?
I'm trying to, are you any good at maths, Logan? Let's work this one out. If I was born in 1965, what age was I in 1977? 12?
12. Yeah.
Right. Well, that was the start of it in a way, because when I said earlier about doing things with your local community and so on, like a lot of the boys, I was in the scouts, and I hadn't yet got to quite to the stage where I felt I needed to leave the scouts. I was still quite happy enough in the scouts, and but something that happened in 1977, which was the year of punk rock and was the year Elvis died, was there was a massive big international scout camp in Waterford, in a place called Mount Melleray, and
Um,
people came from all over the world to it, thousands of people. But the highlight of it for me, and the life-changing event, was that Horslips played at it in a big open field,
no way.
10,000 people. And it blew my mind. I was only 12 and I was too young to go and see them. I knew about Horslips. I knew one or two of their records, I think, but I was too young to go and see them. I couldn't go and see them in a dance hall or go to Bundoran or someplace to see them. I was too young. So to see them was a rare opportunity. And that kind of started to change things for me, seeing Horslips like that. I got really into music. And then, and some years later, in 1980, Thin Lizzy came to my hometown, and they were the first big band ever to come to the town, as far as I know. There may have been some back in the 60s who played on the show band circuit, some well-known American performers. I think Roy Orbison was around and people like that. But
Wow.
Thin Lizzy was the first thing I got to see that was in that kind of scale. And that really changed things for me. I mean, I was a different person after that show. And, I started to follow my own star after that. I started to follow what I was into, not necessarily what, you could agree with on your parents and so on. Although funny enough, I was never really rebelling against my parents. I was actually trying to find ways to connect with them. I wasn't sort of, this is my music and I hate yours. I always liked it
Yeah.
when there was music that we both liked. And that
Yeah.
might be, the Chieftains or the Dubliners or people like that. And I always liked that, and I still do. So I was often trying to find ways to connect with my parents rather than to rebel against them.
Wow. I like sometimes we'd play this game, which is like I got this for Christmas of
Yeah.
my aunt, and it was this Music Legends board game.
Yeah.
And I'd always love when we'd talk about music then and connect about music, because as human beings, we always want to be part of a group and like things other people like. So I definitely see where you're coming from. And it's very nice to know that my parents like this as well, so I can talk to them about this. I definitely see where you're coming from there. And actually, I'd like to go back to where you're saying 11 and go with the flow, because I just really want to ask about getting into music, because that's something that I focus on a lot about music. How does somebody get into music? Because everybody has different stories. But my question is about going with the flow is, I read that you studied law in Queen's University in Belfast.
Yeah.
And how did that come about? And how did you end up changing from studying to law to being a radio presenter and a TV presenter and an author and a poet and all these different things that aren't to do with
Logan, I wish I knew. Look, I mean, really what happened was I was pretty good at school, in terms of exams. I always was up near the top of the class, I guess, but not, I mean, in the secondary school I wasn't, but I would have been in the top 10 or so, or top 5 or whatever it was. It would vary depending on how much I was applying myself in that particular year. But I had no idea in any sense of what I wanted to be when I grew up. I had no sense of vocation or training or teacher. What was it called? Working. What? There was a class. Actually, come to think of it, I completely careers. There was a careers class.
Wow.
And I think that was basically just a room with lots of leaflets in it. So it was no use to me. And I didn't really. I had no idea what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be. I had no particular ambition that was in any way realizable. I wanted to play for Arsenal and I wanted to play in Thin Lizzy and stuff like that, but that wasn't going to happen. And I did know that. But I ended up getting the grades that qualified me to do law. I didn't particularly want to do law. But I didn't really know what it was or anything about it or what it would mean. There were some people in my year at university who knew exactly what they were doing. Maybe their parents had a legal practice or something, and they were going to go and work in that, and they knew what it meant. I had no idea what it was. So for me, it was largely I wanted to go to university. I wanted that experience, but I didn't really have any particular thing that I wanted to do. So I got the grades for it, and that's the only reason I ended up doing it. And then I ended up working in media because while I was at university, I was asked to do some things for the local BBC in Belfast. And that was based on the fact I was writing for the Students' Union newspaper. So they asked me to do bits and pieces to review things and talk about things. And I did this for the laugh and for the £15 check that you would get, which to me was hugely exciting. You could get a lot with 15 quid in those days. And at least I think that's what the fee used to be, something like that. And one thing led to another. And suddenly, I was asked, would I fill in for somebody or would I do my own show? And it ended up being my job without really me planning it or working on it too much. I never trained in journalism. I don't think I was ever taught anything about radio. I was never shown how to use a microphone or anything like that. You know, what distance you should, I still don't know what distance you should be from it or anything like that.
It's
And I'm not,
experience. It's
yeah,
not. It's
I
not
hope so.
knowledge. It's experience. Yeah,
And I'm
that
not
helps you with the
technical
mic.
either. So I ended up, you know, I'm not sure, to be honest, how I ended up doing it, but that's what I've been doing now since I started doing radio shows at nighttime around about 1987. And I've rarely been off the air apart from vacation in the intervening years. So that's a long time, sort of Monday to Friday or Sunday to Thursday, whatever it was, since 1987. So
Wow,
I
that's
hadn't
actually
planned it.
crazy.
Yeah, it is when I think
It's
about it.
now I say this about this law story. It's not only the maddest and most mental story I've ever heard, it's also the coolest. And it's a life lesson and it has some morals in there. You can go with the flow and it'll end up great. Because now look at John, author, poet, worked as a musician for some time, which we'll get back to, works on radio, works on TV. So you can see it does get you somewhere.
Logan, you should be my agent, you know that? Because I haven't heard it put as nicely as that before. But I was
See?
also lucky, Logan. Don't forget, I was lucky too. You know, I fell into things, and
Yeah.
I had the opportunity. You know, sometimes it's not just the opportunity; it's the opportunity to take advantage of the opportunity that you need as well. You know, and sometimes, I mean, in later life, I've been offered things, and I wasn't able to do them because, well, I have a job, or I've got kids, or no, I can't be in America on Friday. You know, this kind of stuff. Whereas back then, anything that came up, I could go, yeah, I'll give that a go. You know, didn't really think anything through. So it's good when you're young, actually, to have a crack at things and say yes. I mean, a lot of the times nowadays I'm saying no to things because I can't do them. You know, I'm not in a position to take on a project or try something different or something new because I have responsibilities to my job or my family or whatever it is. So if you are kind of younger and little more free, say yes to things. I have a lot of friends who've become very, very successful at things that they do. And when they were first asked to do them, they knew nothing about it. But they kind of bluffed. It's the old joke about actors, you know, can you ride a horse? Yep. They always say that, whether they can or not. And that's to get the part. And I know people who've been asked to write operas, and in their head they're saying, I don't know anything about opera, but they say,
Wow.
yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, be open-minded about things because when you get a little bit older, it's just less easy to take advantage of opportunities sometimes.
That see John's giving you life lessons now along with the interview. So listen to these. Like
That's
just go
because
and
I'm very old, Logan. I'm really old.
you're not that old. I know older. But if you feel that way, let's go back to your youth. You were saying there that you were very good in school. And I was wondering what kind of books did you read as a child? Did you read many books as school kind of assignments, or were you a big reader at home?
You know, I wasn't a big reader at all, Logan. I read a lot of comics, and I read well in the earlier days. I read, you know, the funny papers as they call them in America, just comics, Topper and Beano and all those sorts of things. And as I got a bit older, I read the Marvel comics. I liked all of those. Daredevil in particular. I liked Spider-Man. You know, Ant-Man. I liked all those comics when they were around. And I had flirtations with other ones like 2000 AD or for periods of time. And the only other reading I would do was I had a Collins illustrated encyclopedia, and I would just flick through that and read it at random. You know, basically looking at the
Wow.
pictures. But you would learn a lot from that in terms of general knowledge. You know, there'd be a picture of a building in Greece, and just through repetition, you got to know the name of it, just from not from studying the thing, but just from reading it. So I would look through that, but I didn't read. I wasn't reading novels. I wasn't reading, you know, the classics. Sometimes I meet people and they read, you know, Jane Austen and all this kind of stuff. I did read Treasure Island. That's the first kind of proper book that I ever read, and I loved that. and I still love it. I still remember it. I remember the detail from it. Although it may in my mind, like the way it happened, maybe getting confused with the movie version that I saw as well. But I loved that. But I wasn't a big reader, and even when I went up to the big school, I wasn't much of a reader then either. I read, the school books, the school texts, the ones that I didn't like, kind of skimmed them. I didn't really read them in too much detail. But it wasn't until I got sort of halfway through school and I was doing what we called in the North O levels, which is the equivalent here of not the leaving, the one before.
Junior cert, yeah.
Junior cert. And it's then we were introduced to some good books in English. We did trying to remember what it was. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens.
Yeah.
That's a great book. And some of the poetry, it was Wordsworth, stuff like that. But also, I introduced them for the first time to Seamus Heaney and people like that. And I was into doing English. I liked it, and I ended up then doing A-level English, equivalent of doing it for leaving. And then we started to read James Joyce, read Shakespeare properly. We'd done a little before. Things like that. And that set me off. I suddenly realized that there's something to this reading, and there's a great pleasure to be had in reading a good book. Now I never stop reading. I have a house full of books, and people come in and look around and say, "Have you read all of these?" And I read most of them, and what happens is the ones that I haven't read, I never throw them out, because eventually the day will come when I think I've got that book. I think I must, and sure enough, so it's become like a library now, so, and that's how I treat it.
I mean, everybody needs a library.
I must apologize to you, Logan, for not fixing my hair before I come on this. I'm used to getting people putting makeup on me and stuff.
Oh God.
No, I'm not, but only the special people get that.
Don't say that. But that's very interesting, because, as I said earlier, you're an author, and that's quite an interesting story. And like, sometimes teachers, and I really don't like this, but discourage comics. But you grew up with comics, and that started to kind of give you a good idea of reading.
Comics are excellent.
They're brilliant.
And from the other point of view as well, I was pretty good at art too, and I learned all of that from copying the comics. Copying Spider-Man and Captain America and all that.
Yeah.
Just doing those drawings. And I encounter lots of people who would have been heavily influenced by reading comics when they were younger. No, I wouldn't knock that at all. I think it's a good thing to do. It's visual. You've got to use your imagination. It's very artistic. I interviewed Stan Lee once, who was behind
it. Way.
Yeah,
that was
it. That was a bit of a thrill. I didn't meet him. No, it was like this,
Yeah.
But this is like meeting, So no, it was. I'm all for it. I don't know if people read comics anymore, do they?
Well, now.
Your age, for instance.
Well, like a good friend of mine, Zach. He loves comics, like everything to do with Hulk. He's all over it. He loves Marvel, loves DC, all of that. So he definitely read comics. Though kids my age, the Beano, not many kids will read that. Like me, along with some other kids, will pick it up occasionally and get it off relatives and stuff. For instance, like I love the Beano because I got the Dandy Annual 80th and a special edition, which I loved. I read it back to back so many times. It's nearly like I could recite it now. And I've read the recent Beano for Pancake Tuesday and stuff like that, which I really enjoy. But comics would be popular, but you wouldn't be able to go into Easton and just like pick up a Marvel comic. The only really ones that are in bookshops still, which not many children read at all, is Commando and stuff like that. Is it Commando?
No, I don't know that one.
It's about a guy in the army, I think, but they're like nearly like really small books.
Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't think I ever read those, but I do remember those, I think. Yeah. And do you, Logan, do you read? We were talking about the classics there. Do you read novels?
Well, like I'd read books. Like I'm reading a book at the moment called One of Us Is Lying.
Right.
I just finished a book this morning called The Spook's Apprentice, which is kind
Very
of a
good.
fantasy novel.
Yeah.
Um, I wouldn't read classics that much. Like I read The Hound of the Baskervilles
Oh yeah.
a couple of years ago.
Was it a bit dull?
I liked the storyline, but I thought it was
Yeah.
a bit dull. Yeah,
Yeah.
I bought Moby Dick thinking it was going to be hard, like, but a bit easier.
Yeah.
Um, but I read the first page and I went. I said, I said the exact thing you were talking about earlier. Do you know what? There'll be one day when I'll go back to that, and I just
You know,
left
you're
it
right.
there and I went to another book.
You're right about that. Look, it's you don't really need to know all that much about whaling.
Yeah,
There's a lot of information in Moby Dick, a lot of it. But as I say, you never know. You never know.
exactly. It'll be
Um,
one day
and it
I'll
is
have
great.
it,
Look,
and
it's
then I'll
brilliant. But
read it.
Logan, I only read it about 10 years ago, and I read it because it was on holidays and I had nothing else to do. I finally got to read it. But and it's brilliant. But yes, there's an awful lot of information about how to tie knots and how to throw harpoons. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there.
Oh wow. But yeah, that one was shelved pretty quickly. But I also have a question to do with Mystery Train.
Hmm.
And any Mystery Train listeners at the moment who've listened for a long time, probably before I was born, maybe, that Elvis Costello was a co host.
Oh yeah.
And I read about this and I went, what? And I said, I have to ask about this because I've heard a lot of Elvis Costello stuff and he's a very good musician. But to hear he worked with the guy I'm interviewing, again, with your thing, you get opportunities. I said yes. So tell me all about Elvis Costello being your co host.
Well, um, well, it's obviously a wonderful thing for me because before I ever got to know Elvis Costello, I was a huge fan of Elvis Costello. I mean, a very, very important musician to me growing up. And not just in my early teens either, but right through my late teens and early 20s in particular, meant a lot to me. And I'd followed his career. I'd met him. I'd met him at a couple of events, gigs or other people's gigs. I'd met him briefly. And so to cut a long story short, Logan, at the time he was living here. Um, I live in Dublin. He was living not all that far away from where I live. And I was on the radio here, and I'm not sure exactly the sequence of events, but there was music. There was music being sent to the show from a particular record label, and I thought, "Who's sending me this? This is really good stuff." So I rang the label and I said, "Why are you sending me this? And thank you for this music you're sending me. It's great to get it. How do you know about the show?" And they said, "Well, a friend of the label listens to your show." And as soon as they said that, I went, "That's him. It's got to be." So I said, "Well," I said, "Is it Elvis?" And they said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, if he ever wants to come in, you know, if he wants to be part of the show, he'd be more than welcome anytime." And a couple of days later, I got a call. And it was him. So I said, "Do you want to come in?" He just arrived in with a box of CDs, and we just, traded CDs for most of the night. And because he's multi-talented, he really took over the presentation of the show. I mean, he hosted it really, because he opened up the show and said, "Hi, this is Elvis Costello. You're listening to Mystery Train. I'm here with John." He did the whole thing, and he understood how radio worked. He understood.
He
Um,
seems kind of radio savvy that he wasn't coming in
Absolutely.
there with no intelligence
Oh,
on
he
how
did.
radio worked. He
No,
actually came in with the whole idea of how it worked.
he had the show planned, but he also knew how to put it together. He knew what pieces of music would work well in the segue. He knew what would be too long, what would be what would fit where, what would be a good one to start with, what would be a good one to end with. So it was wonderful, and we must have done that. I don't know, maybe 7, 8 times over the years. and he doesn't live here anymore. And I kind of miss that. You know, I do keep in touch with him all right, but I miss him not just coming in. You know, he might be at a loose end and he'd say, I'll come in, or I'd say, look, you know, do you fancy, you know, I missed that opportunity because
Yeah.
I learned a lot of music from him, and from him, and he'd also, you know, he'd leave me a few CDs behind, you know, you can have that one, I've got two of them or something. So but it was an exchange between music fans, actually.
Yeah.
No, just, I mean, I should say, obviously, I wouldn't lose sight of the fact that he's Elvis Costello or anybody I'm dealing with. Um, I still retain that admiration and respect for who they are and what they've meant to me growing up. But when you get into that scenario, it's just two people who are into music talking about other people's music. So he's off the hook talking about himself, and I don't have to ask him interview questions. So we're just two people exchanging music, the way you do with your mates, you know, your mates at school. Uh, except for me, it was extra special because I was doing it with the guy we'd be talking about with my mates at school. So it's a privilege, you know, and a great blessing in my life. That's for sure.
That's actually really lovely to hear. And it's something that I really like is talking to somebody about music. That's really what Logan Sounds Off is about. Having the chats about music, just casual talking. And not only you didn't not only work with Elvis Costello, and I have a list here, so everybody who's listening, get ready.
Oh, yeah.
You also played harmonica on stage with Van Morrison, Tom Robinson, Horselips, who we talked about earlier, Gavin Friday, and Paul Brady, who I'll come back to. How was that?
Well, that's a paragraph I'd like to get off my Wikipedia page, to be honest. But if anybody knows how to do that. But look, I mean, what that is, Logan, is those things. I play a bit of harmonica. I'm not professional level harmonica player at all. Uh, I get up and make train noises and things like that, and chugga noises on the harmonica, and that's fine. Those situations emerged kind of just out of social situations or friendship situations. You know, the most sort of where it moved up a level was Gavin asked me to play on a track, play on a track on one of his albums. So I had to kind of, that was more serious in a sense. But the other occasions were kind of jams, or you know, will you get up and play, or maybe in an older part of my life where I was younger and more confident, I might have jumped up and played, or you know. So but there were just rare events that, looking back on, yes, it seems extraordinary, but at the time, not overly extraordinary because they just developed out of a social situation or out of friendships or connections. You know, I mean, Dublin's a small city, and when you work in my business, you do get to meet all sorts of people, and some of them inevitably, as is the way of the world, might become friends. Some of them don't, and some of them are acquaintances, and some of them are, you know, people you don't see, and some of them are people you maybe won't see much of again, or whatever. Just normal relationships with people, and again, the factor that binds people together is an interest in music. Um, and when you get to that point with people, it doesn't really matter who they are.
That is so. We're back to this go with the flow thing,
Yeah.
where say yes and all this. But that's really interesting. Wow, though, like thinking about that Gavin Friday and all them asking you up, that's really a big deal, and it's very, very interesting to hear somebody be able to say, "I did that. I was with them. I met them." But you played harmonica with Paul Brady, but you also helped in on "Say What You Feel," was it?
Yeah, well, it's
You helped
awful.
out on that album, and I
Mm.
wanted to ask, what was it like working with Paul Brady on that album?
Well, Paul is a master, you know, at what he does. He's one of the greatest singers we've ever produced. He's certainly one of our greatest songwriters. He's an extraordinary musician, extraordinary guitar player. I mean, just to watch Paul tuning his guitar is an extraordinary. I mean, at live concerts, in between songs, when you tune the guitar, you go, what is he even doing? So Paul is a master, and we come from the same part of the world, so there was a connection there already there when we met many years ago now, way back in the 80s, and many mutual friends and so on. And I guess Paul knew that I wrote poetry and whatnot, and he was always saying, why don't you, let's see if we can write a song. And I was going, well, the poetry I write, I don't think is translatable into songs, because well, they're two separate things unless you write a ballad or you write something like on Raglan Road or something like that, which is which is a song before it became a
like
song.
nearly verses kind of thing.
Yeah, that's it. So we wrote a couple of songs and together, about half a dozen, and I mean, like, I knew my place. I'm with one of the best songwriters, so you're I wasn't barreling in there going, let me show you what I got here, Paul. But I did the best I could in terms of, one of the things about co-writing songs is there's a kind of a code that afterwards you don't break down who wrote what, which is the fairest way of doing it, because then you start arguing about, well, I wrote 5/6 of the song and he wrote 1/6 of the song, that kind of stuff. So you don't get into that at all. But what I could say to you is, one of the songs I might have come in with nearly all the lyrics, kind of done, sort of. And then it would need Paul to go bang, bang, biff, get it.
Make it happen.
Yeah. And, obviously the music was his, and the structure and how to turn what I'd written into a good song. I couldn't have done that at all. And then there were other songs where I'd say Paul had written 99% of the song, and I maybe give him a line or two, and then Paul would go, right, that's it, that's that song done now, that kind of thing. So it's very hard to talk about, because it's not what you think, and it wasn't entirely Paul writing the music and me writing the words either. I was kind of, and to some extent, maybe vibing the music a bit too, and he was clearly having an effect.
You both had an input which created a great song.
Well, some of them, a couple of those songs I think are really good, and I think it's funny, it's easier for me to talk about those songs and say they're good, because I can't claim all the credit, if you know what I mean. It's I've rarely written a poem and would be prepared to say, well, that's a good one. Everything I would want to redo. But with the songs, when they're co-written, I kind of stand back from them with a bit of distance, because it was created by another entity. It wasn't created by me. It was created by something else. And but it was a huge honor. I mean, I'd love to do it again sometime, but maybe do it, in an informal kind of a way, just get together. But I think that co-writing thing is difficult for all people, even people at the very highest level. Songwriters, really well-known songwriter meets another really well-known songwriter, and when they get together to write songs, it may or may not work, but it can be a complicated bit of choreography involved in the first one to make a move. What do you think of this? What do you think of that?
That's very interesting, actually, to see, because I know some musicians, and they've talked to me about how they make music and different things, but that unspoken rule you're talking about there, I did 1/6 of it and stuff. I've always kind of sensed that that's a rule, but I've never really thought about it that way. So that's definitely changed the way I look at music in some shape or form. But you were saying there that you can't kind of transfer poetry or translate poetry into a song, and I completely agree with you on that particular point. But you wrote 2 poetry volumes, and one of them called Spaces, was it, and another one called Notions. And I was kind of wondering, obviously you got into broadcasting, but when did you kind of decide yourself when you were going to write poetry, and why did you want to write poetry?
Well, I wrote poetry at school, I wouldn't like anybody to see it. I wouldn't like to see it myself, to be honest. Um,
That's a bit harsh on yourself.
and this is not poetry I was asked to write, for class. This was stuff I was writing myself. It was basically just words, Logan. It was just me being fancy with words and playing around with them, but it didn't mean anything. And then I wrote my last year at school, or was it my first year at university? I wrote a poem and it was published in the Irish press. And back then, that was a kind of a it was a big thing to get your poem in the newspaper, and it was in Saturday's Irish Press. And I started writing. So I was writing poetry when I was at university, and would be involved in student events where I'd be reading the poetry, myself and fellow students who were all trying to figure out how to do this thing. And then other established poets would come and read at the university, and I would always go to the readings. And sometimes we would get to read with them as well. So there were some big names coming through, like, well, Heaney was one. I mean, I did a reading, I was on the same bill as him a couple of times. And, other well-known, I'll pick it up. And when I was at university, various poets used to come and visit, well-known writers, and I would always go and listen to them. Sometimes we shared the stage with them as well. We were allowed to read too at some of these events. But well-known people like Heaney and Derek Mahon came, and well-known figures, and that was obviously very inspirational. And but I never had enough for a book. I never had enough good ones or respectable ones, and even though there might have been at the time some expectation that some of us in the little crowd of people that I operated within may have brought out a book, it never seemed to happen. So I kind of fell away from it for a long time, almost to the point where I couldn't understand why I'd ever written any poetry in the first place. I couldn't connect with it at all. And then round about when I hit 50, a long time later, I started again because I realized I was writing poems in my head, but not writing them down. I'd be lying in bed and I'd write something or think of something, but I wouldn't write it down. And I thought, right, you're wasting stuff here. Write it down on paper at least. So I started using not paper, I started using the note app on my phone, and I was tapping stuff into that. And suddenly I got fired up again, and I got together enough for a first collection. And then pretty hot on the heels of that, second collection. I have a third collection sitting here, but it'll be another 3 years before it comes out, if it comes out at all, which is probably good because it can sit there in the drawer and stew and marinate, and the poems can talk to each other and see what becomes of them. So
I have a mad mental picture from that. I have a very weird mental picture from that. But go on, sorry.
Well, it was a strange. I didn't think it would happen. I didn't think I'd ever start publishing poetry, to be quite honest. But there it is. I'm glad I do. It's a bit all-consuming. And yet it's not that wise to be spending all your time on something which is going to be read by 6 people, and you're not going to make a living from it. But then poetry is not a job in that sense. It's a strange disposition, I think. I don't think it's very hard to describe why you do it, and it's very hard to describe why you do it to someone who's more practically minded about, aren't there other things you could be doing, John? Well, I'm thinking, well, yeah, there probably are, and things I could be getting paid for maybe. But at this stage, I'm sitting there trying to get Fermanagh to rhyme with Nirvana, things like that.
Do you know what? I'm just thinking of a poem there in my head. I'm never gonna say it out loud, but or write it down as you said. But that's Nirvana.
No, but write it down. You don't have to show it to anybody. I mean, do it for yourself, because that's what I started doing. I was doing it for myself. I know it wasn't a career move, and it wasn't. I'm well past the age now that I'm actually looking for attention or anything. So I just I was doing it for myself, literally for myself. So don't throw it away. Write it down. I'm not telling you what to do. You clearly know what you're doing
Oh yeah,
already.
I know that, but
But write it down.
I will. And now I've got a question actually back with Mystery Train.
Yeah.
With you've got a very eclectic mix, and I think you can agree with that as well, especially on Mystery Train. But I was gonna ask, how long does it take to compile, and how do you compile your playlists for Mystery
Yeah.
Train?
Well, it's an interesting question, Logan, but it's very difficult to answer because I can't say how long it takes to compile a program because you're using information that's in your head and has been in your head maybe for decades, you know? And that information has been augmented by more recent information, such as X has a new record out, and I've listened to half of it, and the first two tracks are brilliant, and I remember them, and I must play that on the show. And that song, it kind of reminds me of a Burt Bacharach tune, so I maybe play one of his, and then you remember some. So I'm kind of constantly compiling shows, constantly. It's a non-stop thing with me. Um, I don't go into a room and just do it. It's happening all the time. I use my phone a lot, make up little playlists. If I hear something on the television, I go, oh God, I haven't heard that in years. I must play that on the show. So I'm up looking for a piece of paper to write down to remind me of it. So it's an ongoing process. And especially the way I do it, where I like the music to suggest the next piece of music somehow. And that's an enjoyable process, very rewarding process when you think, oh, that was good, that really worked. That came together very well. So how long does it take me to put a playlist together? Oh, a long time actually.
Wow.
The last part of it, the actual assembly of, me grabbing CDs and going, right, I'll play that, and then oh, there it is there. Where's that one? That putting them all in a little pile. That might take me 20 minutes, 10 minutes. But that's not the making of the playlist. That's just getting all the ducks in a row, really. It's very hard to explain. Because some people understandably might think, well, you do an hour's music or 2 hours music, that's 2 hours work. But it's not really. Somebody else, I know when, experience is a lot of it and being used to doing it. Sometimes people doing it for the first time, or maybe filling in for me when I'm on holidays or something, say, God, how do you do that every night? It took me 3 weeks to put together one show. But I guess with experience, your thought processes are quicker, So somebody new to it might be thinking, oh no, I need to find a song that comes to an abrupt end. And then they spend an hour looking for one. Whereas I might know what that song is, without having to go through all those steps of going and looking for it and so on specifically. So I think the fact I've been doing it for so long is like anything else. It makes things seem easier, and for me, feel easier in ways too.
Wow. And I expected that it would take you a long time because for anybody who hasn't listened to Mystery Train, listen and you'll understand why. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying that in the show is brilliant and it's got so many different genres in it. But I've got one question for you, and that's my final question. That where you saying there, you've got loads of CDs there, and I wanted this as a final question. But do you have any recommendations, music wise or book wise, for
Oh,
people?
well, it's hard. People ask me, often ask me, what are you listening to at the moment? And I'm often stumped because I'm listening to so much. At the moment, the new album from Lisa O'Neill, I think, is an extraordinary thing. I honestly think it's one of the greatest Irish records ever made, and it may prove to be more than that if it gets out into the world. I think she's an extraordinary artist. There's nobody like her. She's got a unique outlook, musically, lyrically, every way. I think she's a very, very fine person and a great artist. So Lisa O'Neill's album is the one I'm recommending to everybody I know. It depends who they are. I mean, I listen to a lot of old stuff, that maybe jazz records and stuff that I know a lot of people may not be into, but I have enough people around the world to send a link to, say, what do you think of this? So in terms of books, I don't know about you, Logan, but during the pandemic, I found it very hard to read books. I couldn't read novels. I read a lot of nonfiction, and I read a fair bit of poetry as well. But of books I've read recently, novels and so on, I was doing an interview with Joseph O'Connor for the radio show I do in the States, and he wrote a book called My Father's House. It's a very good read. It's about an Irish priest who was based in Rome during World War II. And Rome was already at this stage, the fascists had already taken control, but at this stage it was under Nazi occupation. And this priest ran an escape route, top secret escape route for prisoners of war and Jewish people to get out of Rome through Vatican City. And it's an extraordinary adventure story, and a true story at that. And that's the last kind of proper novel I've read and really enjoyed. A lot of the reading I do my radio show in America involves one interview every week. And that means I've got a book to read every week, usually, if it's a writer. And that takes up a lot of my time. So I end up reading about everything from astronomy to physics to the environment to bird song, whatever the topic is.
Wow.
So I'm at the stage now where I know a little bit about a lot of things and not very much about anything,
All these things that you're saying, they're kind of harsh on yourself, but
you should be my agent. You really should. Not that I have one.
See, John, he said about that he started off, he doesn't know what to do, and he went to study law. Here, I'm trying to go into the media business. Turns out I could be his agent. Whoa, see? There's always little changes in people's lives.
No, but you've said things to me, that you're very, very perceptive. I mean, what you're saying is correct. I kind of am hard on myself a lot of the time, but that's fair enough. I think that's better than being ridiculously easy on yourself.
That's kind of true as well.
Some people in my line of work are a bit easy on themselves, and they could do with a bit of self-examination. But you can go too far, and that's probably something I've inherited, like a lot of Irish people. I have a tendency to knock myself down before somebody else does,
Wow. And that story that you're saying about my father's house there, I think a lot of people would be very interested in that, because I know myself, I've got some books up there actually that I borrowed from the library. Yeah. Sorry, I'm pointing completely wrong. I'm sorry. But I got some books there, and a lot of them are about World War II. I think all of them are, apart from two. One of them's Rory Best and my Young Samurai. So, but the rest are all about World War II.
You have a wide range of interests. I noticed some guitars there as well.
Yeah.
Have you a bass guitar as well?
Well, I'll tell you now. The bass is my dad's.
Right.
Sorry, I'm pointing at that because of the camera the way it is at the moment. But the bass there is my dad's. The two guitars are mine. And I got that acoustic for my birthday. Not this year when I turned 11, when I turned 10. And then I got the electric for last Christmas, yeah. And I really enjoy playing guitar. Now, I say this on pretty much every interview that somebody asks me about the guitar. I love guitar. That doesn't mean I'm good at it. I'm not that great at it now, but I really enjoy it.
Well, can I give you another of my boring life lessons when it comes to guitar?
Right? They're not boring. They're very philosophical and interesting.
Well, something. What you said there about I love it, but I'm not good at it. Don't stop playing it, because
Oh yeah.
I did stop playing it because I got to know so many people who were brilliant at playing music. I know I didn't stop playing it because I was, I hated myself or anything. I just thought I'd rather listen to them. I'll enjoy these people playing. But there was no reason why I should have kept it up, even if I only knew three chords. Because a lot of people, for a lot of people, three chords is more than enough.
Yeah, like the Ramones made most of their songs 3 chords each,
Right,
literally.
you are, right? Not often I'm talking to an 11-year-old and he uses the Ramones as an example, so I take my hat off to you again. But you know what I mean? Don't not play it because you're not a virtuoso or something like that. Because that's when I was younger, that's really what happened. You had to, before punk came along, you unless you could play, like Jimmy Page or someone, big guitar virtuoso with all the shredding and all that stuff. It's like you weren't a guitar player. But that's wrong. I mean, I could have got by with those three chords, and I should have stuck with it. I wouldn't have been able to jam with Paul Brady, but well, maybe he could come down to my level and just not use that bizarre chord that he knows. But it's no, but I mean, don't not do it just because you feel you're not great at it, and maybe you are great at it. You see?
Well, all of that's true apart from the last line you said there. All of that's very true apart from the last line. But I'm practicing on it, and I really am enjoying it. But like my granddad once told me this, that he plays golf, and he said, I don't, by the way, this does connect to the guitar in some way. Before you start going, why is this guy ranting on about golf? He said, I'm not that great at golf, but I love it. And I could be stuck in a way worse situation, so I may as well keep on playing it because I love it. Not
Quite right.
because I'm that I'm not good, so I'll stop. I love it.
Yeah,
So that's really something that I've kept in mind when I
yeah.
think, God, I'm not very good at this, am I?
Do what you love. Do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't not do it. Put it that way. Don't find a reason not to do it. Just keep on doing it. Listen to your Uncle John. I'm 102. I know all these things.
Wow. Now that will stay with me for all the years I live. Listen to your Uncle John. But
Yeah.
that sums up
I don't see why you should listen to me. My own children don't listen to me.
Oh God.
And a large proportion of the Irish population doesn't listen to me.
Don't worry, nephew Logan will be here, who's
All right.
11.
Good man. Good man.
But that pretty much sums up all my questions that I've wanted to ask you, John, today. And you have given some brilliant answers, and you've thrown in a bit of philosophy there as well, and life lessons. But I really enjoyed talking to you, and I just want to say thank you for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Logan. And may I say, you're a dab hand at this. You know what you're at, and I commend you and your podcast. And long may it podcast. And thanks for having me as a guest. Lovely to meet you.
Thanks, Sean. Goodbye.
Bye, Logan.